On this episode of the End of Tourism podcast.
If you're traveling well, you should feel like you're falling in love, or like you're in the early stages of a relationship. You should feel that in love chemical mix happening, and that's when you'll know you're traveling well. But then if you feel that other exhilarated feeling that I described about when I went to Pompeii, that is a radar rush. And everybody knows the difference between the excitement of vanquishing someone in a competitive sporting match. That's a very different chemical mix. It's great. It's intoxicating. But I think anybody, if you asked them and they answered honestly, they would say they'd rather have the feeling of falling in love.
Welcome to the End of Tourism. Conversations on wanderlust, exile, and radical hospitality. A quick reminder that the podcast lives on a gift economy model, which means that anyone, anywhere can listen, regardless of their economic situation. Your gift ensures it stays that way, free of advertisements and members-only paywalls. It allows me to devote a great deal of time to this project, to pay for the software and hardware that makes the podcast possible, as well as all of the production and post-production labor. In order to keep the project fed, you can subscribe by making monthly, annual, or one-time offerings at chrischristu.substack.com, where you'll also have access to my writing on these and other subjects including food culture, psychedelics, media ecology, and myth. You can also support us by leaving a review for the pod on Apple or Spotify, by sharing the episodes with your friends, and by following us on social media via the handle, The End of Tourism. On this episode, my guest is Tyson Yunkaporta, an Aboriginal Australian scholar and member of the Appalach clan in far north Queensland. He founded the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin University and wrote Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World, a book which examines how Aboriginal methods of inquiry address contemporary ecological and social challenges. In 2025, his second book, Right Story, Wrong Story, How to Have Fearless Conversations in Hell, was released. Tyson's work brings Aboriginal ways of knowing into dialogue with complexity science, examining how Indigenous thought represents systems thinking developed over tens of thousands of years. His methodology honors Aboriginal traditions of knowledge creation through yarning, collaborative dialogue through stories and mutual respect, and Sand Talk, the practice of drawing symbols in earth to convey complex ideas. Welcome to the End of Tourism podcast, Tyson.
Yeah, good to see you.
I'd like to extend my gratitude to you for your willingness to join me today, given certainly all of the obligations you have to your people in place. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share with me, with our listeners, where you're situated today, in your days and in the world at large.
Yeah, I'm on Bunurong country, down at the bottom of Australia, Melbourne here. And it's coming into winter time, but it's changed in the few years that I've been here. The winter's not as harsh, as fast. We kind of had a really long, what they call Indian summer. Recently, yeah. And a few weeks back, all the ants started mating and grew their wings, and everything that happens around that just sort of took off. I know a lot of people think of springtime as a time for, birds and eggs and mating and everything, but there's always something. Yeah. So the big birds like, your eagles and lyrebirds and turkeys and geese, etc. In this cold time, they're all, mating, dancing. Everything's sexual. All the time. There aren't any dead seasons. There's always something kicking off. And the bats have just left, and the magpie larks left a few weeks back, a couple of weeks ago, and went north. Yeah, so everywhere the place is also the time. So we have time and place in our Indigenous languages. So I'm 3,500 kilometers south of home, up in the north of Queensland there. Belong to the Appalach clan, and a lot of the birds that were here recently, and bats and things, they've flown north up there. The magpie geese and things like that, and magpie larks, a lot of black and white things have flown north there. And I guess, place and time, in our way, it's the same word usually, or the same prefix or suffix in a lot of our indigenous languages. Because the time is the place, because everything's moving. These locations we inhabit, they're not static sort of territories. There's always human and non-human movement, within and across bioregions and over vast distances. Voyaging and migration is just how we all behave. Yeah. All human and non-human entities moving, and even if they're fixed like a tree, they're exchanging, information, nutrients, seeds, leaves, dirt, etc., over vast distances, which is exciting, I think. And lots of us partner with those things and help out with their seed dispersal and all that sort of thing. And that's a kind of an evolutionary, mutualism, collectivism that's sort of developed over time. There are always flows. And so, I'm just kind of flowing with this place now, but my mind is in other places following, species that mean something to me, that have traveled vast distances. All the little sandpipers from here just flew up to Siberia.
Wow.
Yeah, a while back. So I don't know, that's kind of cool. And here I am. And you're there. Started out in Toronto and went all around voyaging, and now you've ended up, there where you're sitting now.
Yeah, in this place that is kind of contending with extreme heat. It's that time of year in this place, and the June bugs and the cicadas are starting to sing, starting to recognize the time of year here, and
that's exciting.
Pray in the ways that they do for the rains.
Do they do yearly or every few years, the cicadas there?
Usually every year, but I think it's, from the little I understand of the regeneration qualities, they're probably on different cycles every year.
Yep. The circadian rhythms. Hey.
Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I think there's so many of these little kind of biocultural resonances that so many urban people like myself and modern people have either just not been taught about or been taught to forsake in some way. And I remember the couple of times I spent there in those lands, in what today is called by many Australia, as a backpacker and as a tourist, as a younger man. I remember traveling through those lands and not having any sense or context or even want to understand the voices of the places that I was traveling through then and there. As I, made my way from Cairns to Sydney and then Melbourne and many places in between, largely as a tourist, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I'm curious. I could wax on and on about my experiences and the lack of perhaps humility and adequate guesthood that I proceeded with as a younger person, but I'm curious about your experiences with the consequences of tourism, either in your own life or in those of the people that you call yours in those lands.
Mm. Well, I guess the last time I sort of went somewhere for ceremony a while back, it was in the Bunya Mountains, which is a really sort of sacred place and gathering place. Like people from far afield all around Australia used to come there and still do, every 3 years, because that's when the bunya harvest happens. The bunya nuts are very fat every 3 years. So it's the tree that calls people in. and there's big ceremony there, and you have to travel the right way. In the global south in general, and indigenous peoples, there's very different border work. Borders aren't about territories, but they're more about sites of ceremony, increase, where you negotiate the norms of access, the flows, even animals, as they move between sort of one bioregional area and the next, they pause at the edge and they do things, That's naturally what we do. We make sure we're respecting the place we're going into, and, that we're making connections with each other. So I guess the last time I went for that, traveling in the same way, coming in the same way traditionally, we went to a very sacred site where there's like a bit of a waterfall and a big pond and cliffs. And we were sort of there trying to do our cultural business and that ceremonies that bring increase, to the land. And there were tourists there, jumping off the waterfall into the pond, and a couple of people were just like having sex in the pond, like this, that Euro trash tourists kind of thing. And I think that's the biggest thing in Australia. Like a lot of, most sacred places are sort of treated as recreational facilities, for people to visit and, being into nature. And it's very much enjoying the waterfall. Is very good for diving and swimming. So of course we have the most sacred places in the centre of Australia, that Uluru, what they used to call Ayers Rock. And it's taboo. Like none of us, even the most senior elders, can sort of go up onto that rock. It's like there are a lot of sacred places like that, all over Australia, that they're so powerful and so sacred they'll make you sick, and people can't go there. They disrupt the place. And the lots of tourists for so long have been climbing the rock. It's one of the things you do when you visit there. You sort of climb up on the top and go, oh yeah, I'm at the top of the world here. That's something I never understood, was mountain climbing. Like, well, why wouldn't anyone want to do that? Anyway, yeah. So there's all that, and there's, of course, people want to buy things, trinkets and such. People want to buy authentic things, but for us, an object or an image, or a sculpture. So I mean, this one here, which is a swamp hen carving. I know that this is an audio medium, so no one can see it, but that's a sacred totemic, entity. And, each carving or image of that carries part of its spirit and its power, So if my children come near it, I have to put my smell on them to make sure they don't get sick from being near it. But if too many of these are made, it depletes the spirit of the thing. And so if you make 1,000 of them, that spirit gets divided among all those images. And they become weak, so they're no longer dangerous or powerful things. And so a lot of our, images and entities and stuff like that are replicated, millions of times for tourist artifacts and things like that. So tourism was always extractive. And much of it involves a kind of imperial nostalgia, this sense from the age of discovery and, the empires, French, British, Spanish, the idea that you could go, anywhere in the world to these exotic locations and there would be a table waiting for you, and there'd be slaves and servants and guides and porters, backpacking. In the old days, you didn't have to carry your own backpack. You could take almost everything and have like 12 black guys carrying it for you. And I guess, tourism throughout Asia and Oceania and Africa, it's giving that sort of imperial nostalgia, that feeling of, going somewhere and, experiencing that early colonial kind of luxury where people were like kings in these places where they stole the land. And just enjoying, very cheap service from locals and, having guides, native guides, take them places, and then getting to, be the big buana, being brought into some kind of ceremony or ritual thing. A lot of that psychedelic sort of tourism in South America with the ayahuasca and everything like that. So you have guides taking you through to these sacred places or doing sacred things, and there's a kind of a dilution that happens because it's extractive. You're taking something. From the spirit of that place, coming in that way. And it's just bad border work, with that idea of borders as, walls, where, if you have privilege, you have access, and therefore keeping undesirable things out and keeping, other things in. So a world of walls and borders and, expansionism and all this kind of thing. It's, tourism is a really interesting process for people. It's like even underprivileged people, they do that to experience that. You have a holiday, you save up all year for 2 weeks, so you can experience the life of a wealthy person, of the wealth class, for a couple of weeks, access these places and feel the privilege that you are, nationality, if you belong to an imperial nation or a colonial sort of settler state, that you get to enjoy and experience that enormous privilege, for the people, to whom all that wealth was accrued, wealth and resources, over the whole colonial era, and then neo-colonialism of now. So you save up all year, you work your ass off, a job that you hate, so you can enjoy that couple of weeks, of immense privilege, a privilege that once belonged to all the people of the earth, because our first law, our indigenous laws, they seem to have universally the same three sort of principles, pillars of no bosses. Nobody can force you to do anything. Freedom to choose, freedom to say no, And then there's the freedom of affiliation, that you can change affiliation with families, clans, go and belong in another culture if you choose to. And, so in the old days here, everybody spoke like a dozen different languages because people would voyage and trade and adopt and marry and spend time in a lot of different countries here. And the last one is freedom of movement, freedom to travel and voyage. So, at some stage, most human beings enjoyed that right and that privilege. But, traveling the right way and coming into places the right way, what we might call lawful voyaging. This is a lawful voyaging, the same as the animals do it. Crows are lawful voyagers, the cranes, the geese, all these different migratory species, and the flows of winds and waters and all these human and non-human entities, lawfully voyaging in the right way, with that respect. And then I guess there's lawless voyaging. And so where in the old days we would trade things like different plants or species, and then we'd bring those things in the right way and make sure people were responsible for them as totems and, would be responsible for integrating them into the ecosystem, so they didn't behave invasively or disrupt things too much, we've always done that, which is why there are a lot of species that have had a global distribution for, tens of thousands of years or more, even hundreds of thousands of years, that they have, distribution all over because people have traded those things and done it the right way. But I guess in the lawless voyaging, people take things with them, which is not the right way. It's more like trafficking, so lots of species now are trafficked and, going to places and causing massive disruptions in the ecosystem, etc. Yeah, and I guess the people do too. There are people who are ferals and weeds, and behave in that way when they land somewhere. They do very well and they proliferate themselves, but They don't proliferate, the rest of life in a place. You should be bringing something to the places you go to where you're adding to the life force and to the regenerative health of that place. You're adding to the diversity of the place. You're bringing something, because that's the purpose of voyaging. It's a gift of giving, and the more places you enrich, then the more these vast networks of interconnected systems, become enriched. And over the course of your life, all of that comes back in massive abundance to you. You're investing, for regenerative futures all the time, and there's real joy in that. And then you're hosted. So if I go to Turtle Island, I've traveled there the right way and been brought in the right way, and so I know which clans are, responsible for me and that I answer to while I'm there if I do the wrong thing, but also will host me. So I know that, I'll always have a place to sleep and something to eat. If I find that Moose Clan people or Turtle people, or Crane people there, those clans will look after me anywhere on the island, on Turtle Island, because I can speak that and talk about the people who brought me in that way. And then those people, anywhere I land, they'll look out after me, so it's like a massive Airbnb. You travel with those credentials, and so you're hosted and you are a good guest, a lawful guest in that place.
Wow, thank you, Tyson. There was a quote in your book that came up for me when you were mentioning Uluru, and I think it's in Sand Talk, and you write that there in Uluru there's a shed full of rocks, and that for a long time tourists took stones away from that sacred site as souvenirs. Then a few decades ago something strange began to happen. The tourists started mailing the rocks back with panicked reports of weird happenings, disturbed sleep, bad luck, ghostly visitations, and terrible accidents.
And sickness, yeah. In psychology, they call it a culture-bound syndrome. And there's a lot of very specific mental illness categories for Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here. And one of those has been studied and is presented as part of the psychology canon, for people when they're working with Indigenous people, psychologists, there are a number of mental illnesses that really specific, profile, of symptoms that doesn't really show up on anything else. And when I was getting treated for bipolar, for my horrific bipolar disorder, they kind of had to sift through and pull out the symptoms that just did not fit with bipolar or anything else, including fugue states and things like that. I was lucky enough to have an Aboriginal psychologist I had access to who could, help them separate all those things out. So we had, a set of treatments for the bipolar, with medication and, therapy. And then there was the rest of it that, I had to work through as well. What we call sorry rocks. That's the Uluru rock phenomenon you were talking about. But, that's just happens all the time. People picking up rocks, in the land and then taking them away and getting sick from those things. And there's a really specific treatment protocol that I know for that. Wow. That I was trained up to do, in the traditional way. And you have to take that person back to that place with the rocks, and you have to call out to the entities of that place and their ancestors. You got to call out and, explain to them loudly, what's going on, and returning them back. And, then the other person has to call out, yeah, please stop tormenting me. And then they've got to walk back exactly on the tracks that you came in on. And then I've got to walk backwards behind them, brushing with leaves, a branch of leaves, brushing the tracks away, like aromatic leaves, so that we're not leaving our scent there or the tracks for those things to follow us out. And you have to get that bad spirit out of the person there, and then it has to stay there with the rocks. And then when you get to the edge, because this is that border work, your boundaries are places for, making sure you're not bringing things across, when you go out, you're not taking anything, but also that you're not bringing things in that are going to harm the place either. So that's where you sit and rest and, come into relation with the place and with the entities of the place, or if you're lucky enough, the people of that place, so it's always good to pause before you walk into these beautiful places, and pause on your way out too. So then the 2 branches brushing off that person, you've got to brush right quite vigorously and shake the leaves from the head to toe, right down the front and back as well, and then hit the branches on the ground to flick that stuff away, and then smoke, make smoke and make sure they bathe in the smoke really well there, and then right there you leave the coals of that fire warm there in that place. Make sure they're not going to blow, bank them up so they don't blow away and start a wrong fire, and then you brush the tracks again away from the fire and, leave out the same way you came in and drive away as fast as you can there. And so the bad stuff that's going to follow the person, it'll stop there at the fire for the warmth. And yeah, I've successfully done that a couple of times,
wow.
Helping with treating people. And so that goes with anything, because you might not pick up a rock, but you'd be in a place and you'll pick up something, some places it's good to make sure you're sort of looking at the ground and you're not like looking all around too much. If you see something like a bright spot or something interesting that really grabs your attention, you don't want to stare at it too much and really approach it. If you hear something, on the edge of your vision, you're not sure, and you're like focusing in on it, there are disembodied things that seek embodiment, and they might seek embodiment in you. Moving through there, which is kind of how I look at a lot of AI, because these are, invisible things, entities, and they do have patterns and patternings of, intelligent like sort of expression and stuff like that. So they are, existing things, entities, but in that invisible way. And so, I sort of regard them always as seeking embodiment. So you use them carefully and keep yourself clean. Try to make sure you're not carrying any of those patterns away if you use that tool. So I'm talking like, all the bad tourist things, but we should probably talk about the good things too. Like what as humans, like, because we all have that same patterning of what it is to be human, We all hate bosses. We all seek to have freedom of movement and, seek to affiliate, with who we want to affiliate with and make relationships. And I don't know. So I ask you that, is that always like the biggest and most satisfying thing that you take away, where you also put back the same amount and you feel that connection forever with that place? Is it the relationships, that you make there? When you meet locals or other travelers from other places, and you form, these strong bonds and memories and connections that last a lifetime. Is that the big thing? And it might even be making non-human relations, with a tree or a species or a body of water even, or a landform. You come into relation with that, and it's the relationship that enriches you. I wouldn't mind hearing your thoughts on that. Just as a young fellow, like particularly too naively traveling, and you spoke about, the wrongness of how you did it, a lot of it. But I bet there was a lot of rightness too, where you were just following your instinctive, human patterning of, being somebody who generates, regenerates, increase. Yeah. Increase, not like growth. Increase is about connections, like creating more diverse, infinite connections and relationships in places and across places. Yeah, what was your experience of that?
Well, I think that, there's certainly a degree of human connection that was everywhere, but at the same time, in terms of any kind of qualitative, hospitable, and when I say hospitable, I refer to the willingness of both a potential guest and host, a local and a visitor, to engage each other on the terms of the place and the time, and to do so with, as you said, a degree of respect for the other that is largely unknown, in the sense that the visitor often was largely a stranger to that place and a stranger to that time, if we're going to speak of them as one interwoven kind of concept. And, I met a lot of people and I visited a lot of places, and there are only a handful of moments and a handful of people that carry a degree of weight in my memory and in my days that are still very much alive in this life, and in my willingness to remember them and to connect with them. And I think a large part of that comes from the kind of infrastructures, the tourism infrastructures that are not necessarily solely beholden to, the quote unquote destinations that people go to. That those notions of how to behave elsewhere come from how people are taught to behave in their home places, how they're taught to understand hospitality within the urban or modern context as something that can be bought and sold, something that's standardized across all cultures, geographies, calendars. And that, of course, that's then brought in the carry-on baggage of people. And that's the unrecognized or unconsidered expectation of the visitor that's then projected upon the host. And so when you find something, or when you encounter someone or some moment that not only challenges but even undermines that, I think it's something that can be really beautiful. And I was very lucky, despite having grown up in a major metropolitan Western city, to have the lived memory of my grandparents, who were peasant farmers in the Balkans before they came to Canada, and that the hospitality, the kind of radical rooted local hospitality that they practiced in the quote unquote old country was still very much alive in the new one. And then I got to grow up with them, largely raised by them, and got to kind of have that as this kind of memory, this kind of amulet of memory that I could take with me, and not necessarily consciously, but something that when that kind of hospitality showed up, I had the ability to have a point of reference for it within my own days and my family, which, I think that a lot of people that I grew up with and a lot of people in the places, like the place that I came from, don't have that lived memory anymore. I also worked more or less a decade in the hotel and restaurant industries and catering and all that. So I definitely also saw the other side of that. So I think there's this sense that when people travel, when they engage in what we call tourism, there is this kind of longing for some kind of lived memory of what that either was like, how it might be in other places, how it could still be for them?
Well, your peak moments are always moments of profound connection, of coming into relation. You hear people telling their stories, and they always want to tell story, And I don't know, there's this Western sort of eye-rolling thing, of, oh my God, please, not the slideshow. Don't show me all your holiday pictures, Jesus. But that should be something that's revered and that people love to receive. Because everyone has been on that holiday, they come back and they want to share. They want to share there. And it's always stories of relation. No matter where people come from or no matter how disconnected they are from, their biology or anything else, or the land, sharing story, that's so important. That's what travel is, and that's one of the things you bring to places too, and you leave there, is your stories that you bring when you meet people. And then the stories that you bring back, it's so important. Just the informatics of that are mind-blowing, You see, when they talk about the peak experiences, it's never just, the parasailing or that, snorkeling. It wasn't like, I snorkeled the Great Barrier Reef, and what they talk about is profound moments of connection, like, when they sort of swam right up to a groper, or a groper swam up to them, or a dolphin or something, and they connected with it. And they can't quite put words to it, but that was their profound moment, of coming into relation with a non-human. But then also, all they want to talk about is bloody, Gregor, who was, I don't know, who was their, helper on the boat, who was their guide. You know what I mean? It's about how great he was, and, they want to talk about him. And little Shelley, who was, the concierge at the motel, and she was so generous, and, he sat down and she told us all about her grandparents and all this sort of thing. And they talk about the relation. Their peak experiences are always around that, and their fond memories is around the relationships, because we know instinctively that that's why we're traveling. You are, potentially connected to everything in the universe, in one way or another. And it's kind of like your purpose on Earth is to realize as many of those connections as you can, to proliferate, your networks of relations, because that's what you are, And the more, variation and just abundant diversity in those relations that you can create, as far afield as possible, that's what makes you, that's what grows you and makes you everything that you can be. And there's just infinite satisfaction, needs satisfaction in doing that, becoming that. I started talking right at the start, and so I'm going to start another thread here. And I know I've been talking for ages, but I'm going to do it again.
Please.
I started at the start talking about how sexual everything is, in the land. And that's us too. We're sexual. When we travel, we leave pieces of ourselves. Our smell, our skin cells, our hair, parts of our biology stay there, and the ants take those pieces down into the ground, and they end up in tree roots and then into the trees and our memory, and, our patterning is there in that place, forever. So it has a memory, and memories that we bring and information that we bring from far afield. And when you're in a place, it's always, the season for something, mating. And it's the task of everything around it, even if it's not their season for procreating, they still belong in that sexual ceremony. So the magpies hear these, very pointy-beaked things. It's not their mating season now, but it is their singing season, because they're singing the love songs, for all the other things that are mating now. And so your sexual behavior isn't limited to one time and for one purpose. It's continuous with every species. If a tree is flowering, that's its time. But then also, when it's not flowering and it's not its reproductive time, then it's exuding scents and sounds with the different kinds of winds that come in that season that will, be part of the ceremony for everything else. And so, when we travel and we come into a place, we pick up all this like increase signals from the land, all of this love magic ceremony, that's going on all around us, and we feel that. And I guess, if you go into a new place, you're receiving signals from that place that you might not notice, in the places familiar to you, because it's all so new, it's hitting you raw, even if you're not conscious of it. And so you do become, excited, and you're seeking, as a sexual being in that place, that new place. And that's always been a really big part of, diplomacy, embassy, meeting, for ceremony between different groups, when you're coming into new places. The idea is to come into relation. So you either have a sort of a temporary adoptive status, or you figure out how your grandfather might have traveled there. And then, okay, so what did he call somebody? He called him uncle. So, all right, well, you and I will call each other cousin or brother. You know what I mean? But if that prior relation isn't there, then you have to have some kind of adoption through. So you connect with somebody, who might want to call you brother, and then you call, his uncle's uncle, you know what I mean? That kind of thing, and you come into relation that way. But then there's also like that kind of marrying in, which doesn't have to be a marriage, it can just be a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship, may or may not be consummated, but it's, can just be flirty or something like that. But, that ultimate kind of exchange is to exchange biology, your biology with someone from that place. And you feel driven to do that, because that's how we proliferate, genetic diversity, in our species, that keeps the species vigorous. It's to mate with those who are unlike you, who aren't from the same gene pool, So you feel very driven to do that. So there is that real drive, like whether you're, actually having any romantic hookups or anything like that, still it's very much a profound sexual drive when you voyage, when you go to new places. You feel that very strongly, whether you realize it or not. And that's part of that sort of big dopamine. Like, you must have felt it when you were young, just that you're on a high, for traveling in the place.
Absolutely.
And, I'd say at least half of that is the same as like feeling that same feeling and chemical, cocktail of when you fall in love, you feel like you're in love. And so you fall in love like stupidly. Immediately, but man, when I went to Africa, it was like everything around me was like sexual signals coming in, and I'm looking at like these people in Uganda. I'm like every single person I see is like freaking, and I'm seeing thousands of people, young and old, big, little, fat, skinny, and they're all like just, oh my God, they're all really sexy, and they walk, culturally, they walk in different ways from how we walk here, and I'm looking at how they're walking, and I'm like, oh my God, that's the sexiest thing I've ever seen. And so, I found the time that I was there, I just felt on fire the whole time, And I guess, I don't know, if you come from a culture where sexuality is like repressed, then it kind of gets driven underground and twisted, into fetishes. And particularly if you're coming from a colonizing or imperial culture, power relations get mixed up in that. And so the idea of, dominating or being dominated is a lot of that kind of, kink and that sort of appeal and intensifier for you. And people chase that like an addiction, And so that's how you end up with, what's basically a really good and pure and natural impulse when you travel, and a way of, that feeling is supposed to make you connect and relate and, have a stake through intense relationships, have a stake in that place, to care for that place and the people, through that connection. That gets twisted, that impulse. And so then you end up with the sex tourism.
Right.
And a lot of that is, fetishized stuff around power relations. It's sort of part of that imperial nostalgia around the rape and pillage of these places and the sort of high excitement and drama of that, particularly, in Asia. You'll find this in sexual tourism. People are coming, to have those experiences that are not acceptable in their culture or even illegal in their place of origin, and they want to go and do those things in that kind of twisted, unbalanced power relation. They want to experience the domination that their grandfathers and great grandfathers experienced, coming into a place and just pillaging the hell out of it. Yeah. And so, if your sexuality is twisted, everything's twisted, And that's what like capital and top-down sort of hierarchies do to the people. It twists them at the most fundamental level. And that border work I was telling you about before, of the global south, and you find it with lots of minorities and even like LGBTQI plus community, they have that more flowing border work. But that other side border work that's very much in the global north of those imperial cultures and that recent invention of nations that's only just over a century old, this border work is iron, and it's not just for national and state borders, it's for people as well, and family. So the idea of what a family is, there's borders around that, and what is normal and what is a polluted or toxic or contagious influence. You can't let those things in, like gayness and stuff like that. So there's border work, that's happening all the time, and it's bad border work like that. And then there's even just your personal border work, because you have your boundaries. And the best thing about boundaries is bringing those boundaries up and overlapping with another person's boundaries, and that negotiation of a relation, in that third space where you create a third entity, of your relationship. That is just exhilarating because you're driven to do that kind of border work. But if you're in, a society where you have to be competitive with others to survive, then your border work's going to be wrong. And that's what consent is, the center of everything, because that's what happens at borders is consent. But it's more than that. Consent is like something beautiful. And you can see it more in the word consensual, like feeling together, and there is a sensuality to it. It's the most intoxicating and uplifting thing, is you're creating consent. So, when you enter a beautiful place as a tourist, you're stopping at the edge of that place and bringing your boundary of you and all the relations and identities that you're bringing that to that border, and you're creating, that beautiful consensuality with place. But that gets twisted, right? Consent, the violation of a boundary, the violation of consent is something that tourists do. And that's exhilarating to do that. I've done that. I did that when I went to Pompeii. That place that set me on fire, the spirit of that place. And I didn't come in the right way.
Wow.
I was just all over that place. I'm stepping on things that are crumbling, under my feet where I'm not supposed to walk, because damn it, I want to go. Like you see this sort of tunnel and there's a fence in front of it saying, do not enter. And I'm like, damn, I'm going in there. So I penetrate this tunnel and, I want to Indiana Jones that place. I want to go into the tombs and stuff. I want to see the stuff I'm not supposed to see. I want to take the things that I'm not supposed to take. I remember doing that. And I still remember how exhilarating it was to do that. But like the damage there, of me just kind of violating the boundaries of that place and violating that respectful relation of a place that was frozen in a moment of time. Under something as powerful and sacred as a volcano. It's a very sacred site, and I did the same thing to it that tourists do to Uluru here. Yeah, and I don't know, it was when I was much younger, but I did have a few bad years after I did that. I was getting tormented, and it's probably damaged me in a lot of ways that are permanent. Probably took a few years off my life. doing that. But my heart's racing thinking about it. It was so freaking exciting to like invade and and tomb raid that place. And that's a telling thing, isn't it? Tomb raider. You're raiding somewhere. Anyway, so I reckon that it's that kind of excitement that's behind, the worst of the sexual tourism and everything else. But yeah, and that's the stuff that doesn't go in the slideshow. That the sexual encounters. People come back with secrets. People come back with very intense, brief relationships they've had physically with people, and they kind of cherish those forever. But that was that drive, to be somewhere and come into an embassy kind of relation with people of different places. Voyaging is just that's what we do as humans.
When you were mentioning that just now, I was reminded of a quote in one of your books, and I think it speaks to the broader, perhaps lawless voyaging of the last centuries. Somewhere in there, you say something to the extent of, if you don't move with the land, or perhaps if you don't move well with the land will move you. And I'm curious in the context, maybe not just of tourism, but also migration. And you also mentioned the consequences of the nation, the nationalism of our times, what that notion means to you, that the land will move you if you don't learn to move with it, perhaps in the ways that serves the land.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I guess the desire is to sort of freeze things. Sort of conform with this, Abrahamic religious idea of there being a single God, and everything that sits outside of God is evil. But God made a creation, and a perfect creation, and He put the zebras there, and that's where they are. And He put the black people here, and that is their place. Yeah. That and I guess this is part of where the bad border work comes from, this idea of, territories that God has declared are yours, in perpetuity, and that anything that moves across those borders is evil and outsider and other. I think that's what's sort of at the heart of things. Nationalism and aggressive ethno-state kind of moves. This is always like the impulse behind fascism and autocracy, and the rest. And then you need that hierarchical governance. You need that abuse and that aggressive, border work of every individual in order to dominate or, compete, within these systems. And it goes down to every single unit. And you define yourself by who you hate, not who you love. You define yourself by who is other. So what am I? Well, I'm not that. The zebras bloody belong there, And we're going to traffic those zebras everywhere. We're going to traffic those things to places, where they don't belong, where they'll do damage. We're going to traffic these foxes because we like fox hunting, so we're going to take them to Australia, and responsible for that. But it's weird because then the thing itself becomes evil. So the cane toad, from Ecuador, that's here, that's the evil invasive species, not the people who trafficked it. So there's that idea that things that are not in the place where God put them are evil, but somehow you're not evil for having been responsible for trafficking that thing irresponsibly and not bringing it into place in the right way and being responsible for it. Yeah. So, that's what all that is. But, there are rideways too. Have you ever come across these, I'll show you on this Woomera, those tiny little red beads with the black part on? Really shiny little seeds. I think the Latin name is Abrus precatorius. Precatorius being precious. And there is a global distribution of these things, all over the global south. And they're native here. but they are sacred, and they're deadly poison. So animals, even birds don't eat them.
Well,
So they are not dispersed by anything except human beings. Like humans are the only things that disperse these seeds. So how did they get all around the entire southern hemisphere? They have these in the Amazon, and I've sat with Kichwa peoples, like talking about that. They have their own names for it there, and Sri Lanka, India, Africa. They're all around the world, and they've been dispersed all around the southern hemisphere for so long that they've actually evolved differently to be sort of different subspecies in different places, but they can only be dispersed by people. And so we've got like people in the Amazon who are related genetically to us, indigenous, like Aboriginal Australians. We share DNA with those peoples in the Amazon. So there has been voyaging internationally for a really long time. Even long before the Europeans came here, we were trading up through the Silk Road, up through what's now Indonesia and everything else. We had trade. There's greenstone here that's in the south of Australia that was traded right up north, and then across the sea and into the Silk Road, and all kinds of things traded. And so we had steel here and everything traded through, and trading our native tobaccos for tobaccos from elsewhere and all that kind of thing. So that's been going on forever now, but it's very ancient. Like you can see from the evidence of that giddy bead, that little red bead, Umbris precatorius, which Catholics everywhere, when they've encountered these, in their travels, in imperial travels, they've used them for rosary beads, even because they know they're sacred.
wow.
They're deadly poisonous but beautiful, and they're always used in sacred items. So that woman I showed you, that's a sacred men's thing that's used to control your men's energy. And it always seems to be around men's and women's business. And there's a sexual element to it as well, because you have to pick the right one, and you have to know the process for finding the right one to use. Otherwise, you'll kill yourself. One of those seeds, a man can take it, and he will be sterile for a year. And the same with a woman. A woman takes it, and she's sterile for a year. So this is actually an ancient form of birth control.
Wow.
That's been used for that. Like even in Ayurvedic medicines in India, it's been used from time out of mind for that. It's been used that way in Africa, in South America, and all over Australia. These giddy beads have been used for birth control for a long time. So, that insane idea of like, modern Western medicine has like liberated women for the first time in history, with the birth control pill. It's like, nah, bros. So that's why it's sacred. It's part of that whole, sexual congress that happens with voyaging and human embassy. And so this is something that's been dispersed, all over the Southern Hemisphere by people in ritual relation with each other, and traveling and voyaging for ritual relation, everywhere, and sharing these things for, maybe 100,000 years or more, a very long time. So I find that story of that seed really exciting. So we use them to decorate tumpup, which is like fire sticks. There's a pouch of beeswax with these embedded in it, and the tumpup, one of the sticks is male and the other is female. And that tumpup is like a sacred thing that represents the sexual relationship between a man and a woman, and their kind of roles and rights together, and what it is to be in good relation together, in lawful relation. In that third space, the relation is contained in the fire, the hearth. So the fire sticks are really sacred, because the word for wife or partner, female partner, is firewoman, and the term for the male partner is fireman. And so those six are really sacred, and they govern and regulate and carry the law of building a consensual entity of relation, in that third space of the fire, which is that living entity that you create together. But what's really cool is when you make a connection with somebody like that, you also have that same relation with all her sisters. So you might not actually, have sex or marry any of her sisters. You probably won't, but they're still in the same kinship category as your wife. So like everybody in kinship that you are compatible with, like you're lawfully allowed to have sex with, they are in that relation. And all her parents and uncles and aunties, they're in-laws to you. And this affects the way I see like everybody. So if I met your girlfriend or wife or a partner that you had a sexual relation with, and I saw them and I felt, that we were compatible sexually, then I would call you brother, because that's that brother relation, But if I wasn't, I felt like that I'm not supposed to have that energy sexually with that person, or feel that or think in that way, then I call you like cousin, Yeah, because that's how it works. That's our instinct, but also the kinship relation prevents inbreeding and stuff like that. It preserves the mitochondria, even in small populations. So that sexual relation can define what your relation and affiliation is with the people all around. Any woman I have sex with, I will call her brothers cousins, and I'll call her cousins brothers, if that makes any sense. So, if I come into a place and I have like a sexual relationship or a sexual feeling for somebody, then that'll determine how I relate with the other people if we don't have any other kinship connection. Who will I think of as mothers and aunties, who I will sort of regard as a grandparent or an old person, all that kind of thing. Yeah, and I don't know. So that's the purpose of travel, is to increase relatedness, to form more networks and bonds of relation.
A deep degree of courtship that follows in both contexts, right? In the interpersonal and in the intercultural as well.
Yeah, courtship. Yeah. And it's all that. And it's not just you two. It's everybody around you is, like I said, the magpies are singing their songs now. They're singing love songs, even though it's not their mating season, but they're singing love songs for the other things that are mating, in this season, which is amazing. Birds and turkeys and eagles, and emus. This is that time. And there is a big dark emu shape in the Milky Way that you see in Australia. And when it's in that certain position and that star is in its eye there, then that's the mating. Right now, you can get emu eggs, and it's the male who raises the chicks and sits on the eggs. And the magpies are singing those love songs, for those mating emus. And how cool is that? And so that's what you're doing, even if you're like, you're already in a committed relationship and you're not available, or even if you're asexual or you're just not down for sex, in that context, you're still joining in that kind of love ceremony for the people around you who are doing that. You're contributing to that all the time. And so I guess if you had a male partner, then I'd be doing it the same way. I'd be like, oh, well, that person is a compatible sexual partner for me. Like if I've already called you brother because of that girl that we both liked, then I would assume that this fella too, I'd call him cousin, and, he'd be, compatible. And that's how I would treat him, in that way, in that kind of wife category, which is pretty cool. And see, that's the thing too, like all of these relations, they're really queer kind of assemblages in nature, and so, queer people always have had that sacred role of being able to move between, both of those energies and to be, two things at once in a kinship system, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it seems like so much of your work, or at least the little that I've, had the pleasure and honor of reading and contending with, has been an attempt to try to deepen our capacity as humans to inhabit more than, one identity or role or function or maybe even place at once, and to do so in a way that honors the kind of dynamic heterogeneity, that's maybe too dense of a word, but queerness perhaps that's latent in the world.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, LGBTQI plus people have good border work generally, because that's what it is, to be somebody who's in between, in that way. That's why that's sacred, and that's why it's always been sacred. But I guess summing everything up with all the threads that we brought together, if you're traveling well, you should feel like you're falling in love. Well, like you're in the early stages of a relationship, you should feel that in-love chemical mix happening, and that's when you'll know you're traveling well. But then if you feel that other exhilarated feeling that I described about when I went to Pompeii, that is a radar rush. And everybody knows the difference, between the excitement of vanquishing someone in a competitive sporting match. That's a very different chemical mix. It's great. It's intoxicating. But I think if you asked them and they answered honestly, they would say they'd rather have the feeling of falling in love. So to travel well and not be a tourist, but to travel as thinking of yourself as a diplomat between different species and different peoples and different genders and everything else, between the human and non-human, to be in that role and feeling that like you're falling in love. You're doing it right then, and you just follow all that. You follow that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tyson. You've given me certainly a hell of a lot to meditate on and to wonder about. And of course, I'm deeply, deeply grateful for your willingness to do so, your time, given all the other things that you certainly have in your life and all the people that you are caring for in your days. And on behalf of our listeners, of course, I'd like to thank you as well for those that will be putting their ear to this episode in the time to come.
And I guess come back to where we were at the start with where we're sitting, where and when, which is a where, when, and an every when, of deep time. But, in that sense, we're always traveling because the land is flowing around you, even when you're still, things are migrating through, You have traveled to a different place when those birds come in that you haven't seen since last year, when those butterflies or the ants start flying, you're traveling. And, you can always fall in love as a good voyager in the land, because the land will move you, but it also flows around you, and so you're always traveling even when you're in place, which is pretty damn beautiful. You're looking at different stars, every night, and every hour throughout the night you're traveling under those stars, even if you're just sitting on your porch. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, man. Well, may your path and your travels be kissed by that feeling and perhaps even skill of falling in love.
Yeah. I need to get back to that. I need to get back to feeling that love magic again. It's been a couple of months for me of not feeling it. But, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Actually, I felt it with the flying ants, but, yeah. But then it went away because, work, money, different flow. Yeah, you got to fall in love. All right. Let's get off this machine and go fall in love again.
Thank you for listening. To follow up on this episode, check out the homework section on our website at theendofTourism.com. Likewise, you can subscribe and join the conversation at chrischristou.substack.com. That's CHRISCHRISTOU.substack.com. The pod embraces a gift economy model, and by signing up, spreading the word, and supporting us financially, we can ensure that this work continues in a good way. Until next time, farewell, friends.